Okay, we may start like 20 seconds earlier. I think it's fine. Welcome everybody. Welcome to the presentation about writing DSC class-based resources. My name is Bartek Bielawski, and I'm gonna try to explain to you why I think you should do that and how you can do that. First, before we move out of the PowerPoint, let's bring the mandatory slide about our sponsors. We are grateful to them because of the place where we are and how nice food is and everything, so that we can enjoy the conference and not worry about everything outside of this room. Just focus on the getting the knowledge in our heads. So that's it for PowerPoint for today. Oh. Let's move on to my presentation tool of choice. Move things around. There you go. So, writing DSC class-based resources. PowerPoint did its thing, I think. Let me duplicate. There you go. Yeah, you were missing out, right? In case you don't know, I mentioned that yesterday all the drawings, all the graphics during this presentation are courtesy of my daughter Hania, who's 15, and I would just request to her all the drawings during this presentation. Before we start, let's look first maybe at agenda for today. So first I want to try to explain to you why. And I'm going to divide it into 3 subcategories. We'll get to that soon. Then I will try to go a little bit about the classes themselves, because that may be the new concept for you guys. I know that outside of DSC, classes are not very popular because that's the primary reason they were introduced. There was a very nice presentation yesterday. I would recommend you to go to this presentation, but you cannot really tell yourself in the past to go to the presentation yesterday. Actually, I think it was Monday. Time flies when you're having fun. Anyways, there was a very nice presentation. You can definitely watch it later after the conference, but unfortunately you won't be able to watch it after this presentation. Then I would go over the structure of the modules that are for resources using DSC classes. Then I will show you some ideas that we implemented in our organization. By the way, our organization is doing DSC on a daily basis, so we basically maintain all our server fleet using PowerShell DSC. We configure them in all the settings. We almost dropped GPOs for that reason, because there's one setting that we couldn't figure out, or we didn't have enough time to figure out how to set. Everything else is done with DSC. So that's why I have some ideas that I can share with you, because I have an experience from the actual, I was there when the bread was made. I would also explain some pitfalls that we fell into and we try to get out from. And I will also show you a little bit about the testing of your DSC resources. So before we start, I wanted to ask you guys, how many of you are using DSC nowadays? Yeah, would be surprising. How many of you authored any DSC resources yourself? Awesome, that's a perfect crowd. Okay, a few words about myself. No, don't go there, go here, please. So my name is Bartek Bielawski. My handle on Twitter is @bielawb. You can also ping me on email. I'm working for Optiver, and we're currently hiring. So if you are interested in changing jobs and you are interested in working with DSC on a daily basis, you can attack me after the presentation. I will share the card with you, or we can just have a chat about that. And you can also find my work, not a lot of it, but some of it on on the GitHub actually. So that's it about me. I think that's sufficient. Let's move on to why. So first, I will try to explain why you would still use DSC. I'm not sure if you've noticed that, but it feels like Microsoft is not really paying too much attention to this product anymore. They moved from the DSC as like something that works on-prem to something that works in cloud. So if you are in a situation like I am, that the cloud for you is just something that you don't touch for production things, then you cannot really use it. But you have to remember that DSC have two elements to it. There's DSC as a way to control your environment with DSC pool server, with LCM, all those things that kind of allow you to talk from some central location and configure your machines. But there's also a second element to it. There's DSC resources or all those things that you put on your machines. And those can be consumed not just by DSC, but there's also nice support for that with things like Puppet, Chef. I think there was some attempts to do that with also with Ansible, but I'm not sure how successful they were. When I was looking at it, it was terrible, but maybe they improved over time. But overall, you have to remember that even if you not use DSC for talking to your machine, you can still use DSC resources to be able to control what's happening inside of the machine using any agent of your choice. So the second question I wanted to answer is why would you create resources? And I think with the amount of hands in the air, I know that you already know the answer, but I'm still going to go through it. So first of all, from my perspective, the first reason why would you create DSC resource is that you try to maintain or control the configuration of the application or maybe some feature that is nowhere to be found or maybe very specific for your organization, some in-house application that you want to maintain with DSC. For the first one, you can sometimes find something online and be good with it. But for the second one, very often you will find yourself, okay, there's nobody else is using DSC for that particular piece of technology, or they cannot even use it because they don't have access to it. So I'm responsible for maintaining it. Therefore, I need to be able to configure it properly. And the last question is, why would you do that with classes? So, how many of you have to still use PowerShell 4 or cannot install PowerShell 5 on all your boxes? Oh, that's okay. I'm sad for you. It's really pity. Actually, I should raise my hand because we have like 2 Exchange 2013 boxes, and we just have to pretend like they don't exist. Because obviously, all the things that I will show you here today, they don't work with those things because they have to have PowerShell 4, as Exchange depends on it. So, the classes, the reason why we would use classes is that, from my perspective, the authoring of DSC resources is way better than it is with the previous approach that we used. So how many of you use written modules DSC resources using PowerShell modules, so the old way of creating DSC resources in the past? Yeah. So did you enjoy this experience? Yeah, that's what I was expecting. So let's move on to classes. So in this, the picture is actually was inspired by Matthias because he mentioned that classes for him kind of linked to this. So first of all, I will show you a few things like the distinction between enum and class. There are 2 types of classes that you can create in PowerShell. Then we will gonna go quickly over class structure. Then I would touch briefly on the constructors. They're not super interesting for the DSC. Still, you can use them, but they are usually not used at all. And then I will touch on inheritance, which will come back later as well. So, as I mentioned, you have 2 types of classes. You have enums, which is just basically just a way to tell PowerShell, okay, for this class, I just want to have one of those values, right? Next to that, we have, so if I ask for that, then I get just from tool, I have my tool Puppet. The class itself usually contains properties, methods, and other elements, and generally speaking, it's just more complex way of describing a world. So here I'm just creating the class, and I can create a new instance of this class, and I get those 2 properties that I expected. Now I can fill them up and just do something productive with it. The structure itself, as I mentioned, you can have properties. I'm not going to dive into like technical details. Is it property field or something like that? To be honest, It's probably incorrect technically to say this property, but from my perspective, that behaves like property, looks like property, it tastes like property, so it has to be property. The methods, you can just define them in a very simple way. So, sorry, I should probably mention that properties, you define them by specifying type, and just the name of the property will just be name of the variable that you put next to it. So it kind of feels like you are creating it feels a bit like a parent block, more or less. Whereas methods have the syntax that we never had before in PowerShell. So you have your type of the method. Method should return the type that you promised. There is no way to get around it. There is the name of the method, and after that you have your parameters that you will send, and then you have script block that defines what the method should do. Constructor is just a very special type of a method, and the only purpose it serves is that allows you to create an instance of your class easier than by just creating an empty instance and then you're just applying the values to all the properties. So you can just say, okay, if you specify the value for bar, I will just assign it to bar, and that will just return the instance that already has this. And you have to remember that PowerShell classes, by default, they have constructor already. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to create an instance of the class at all. And it's fine, but you have to remember that once you introduce your own constructors, this default constructor that PowerShell will create for you disappears. So if you take over the construction creation process, you have to make sure that you explicitly say, okay, by the way, don't just throw away this nice constructor. I will use it later, but I want mine, but I want yours too. So you need to define this default constructor as well. I mean, it doesn't have to be as simple as this one, but you have to have it there. So when I say default, it's the one that doesn't take any parameters, or parameterless constructor, and that one will come back later, because that one is pretty useful when you try to create an instance of your class. So as I mentioned, we created the constructor. When we say this, we specify, oh yeah, I didn't define the type, so obviously that's not going to work. So let's quickly define it. Yeah, that should help with creating instances. So my instance is created, and indeed the value of that I provided to constructor was taken, and it was used, and value to the property bar was assigned. Sometimes you will see like that, okay, I can obviously do this, so I can create empty one, and then assign a value, and then run the method. All those things will work. But with when you just have the parameterless constructor as well in your code, that means that something like that will work. So you can cast the hash table to your type. That would not work if I would just create my own constructor and not add explicitly add this parameterless constructor. So this is depending on the parameterless constructor. So it creates the instance, and whatever you put in the hash table, it would just assign it to the like matching property, and just does the work for you. Inheritance is pretty interesting, because what it means is that you can say, okay, this is my PowerShell class, this is my PowerShell class. I want to use some features from this one because I want to extend it a little bit. So for example, you would have something like in the DSC world, we had something like, I want to be able to create a special file, but then I want to make it a configuration file, which will mean that it will restart something or run some code when this file changes, because that's important, right? If you change the configuration of the IAS, you do want to restart the web page so it's actually reflected. If you change the configuration of the service, the same applies. You don't want to change your configuration and then just, well, hope that everything will happen. If you can restore the service, you can do that there. So inheritance is actually allowing you to say, okay, I already have this one. So if I create the class that inherits from foo, it has this same all the templating of the foo. So I already have the property bar in it. But you don't have to inherit from something that you created. You can also inherit from something that somebody else created. Like here, I'm just inheriting from the system.net.web client, which means that when I create my own class, and I'm trying to create the instance of it, and then I'm trying to download the Google, probably that will kind of fail, because I don't think I configured my Wi-Fi at all. So yeah, could not resolve, expected. But overall, if it would work, if I would be bothered with connecting to Wi-Fi, then it would just save this to the temp file, and I would be able to use it. And as you can see, I got this download file method for free, right? So I didn't have to spend time in introducing that. I could just take it and just use it right away. So that's about the classes. Now about the module structure. So I'm going to touch on the two things. First of all, authoring experience. So why I think that authoring experience with classes is so much better compared to the authoring the experience with the previous approach to creating PowerShell DSC resources. And then we will look quickly at the folder structure as it's being created. So I have just like very simple DSC resource here in my box. I will show you later how it looks like, and we will just dive into that. So the thing that I like is that the moment you add, so the way you tell PowerShell that your class is a resource is by applying the attribute DSC resource. And the good thing about that is that PowerShell will recognize, okay, you want DSC resource, but by the way, if you really want to have DSC resource, you should have few methods. Makes sense, right? If you want to test things, set things, and get things, you need to have methods for that. You also, in your resource, you need to be able to tell what you're modifying. So you need something like a key property or key properties. So that's something that you cannot avoid. You have to have it, otherwise you won't be able to tell, oh, I'm changing this file, or I'm changing this chair, or I'm changing this lamp. I have to have a key that will tell PowerShell, okay, this is what you should change, not that you should change all the lamps in the room. So that's something that we will require. And you know, the moment you add something, it will tell you already, okay, you have these things, but still you are missing that. So it's gradually leads you to the point where you actually have DSC class that can be used as DSC resource. There's a caveat to that. I will come back to that later in the pitfalls, because some things it will not tell you that you did wrong. And you will probably find out about it at the execution time, which is not great. And I haven't found a way to solve it yet. I'm hoping that I will figure out that, and I will probably share that probably in some blog post or something like that once I find it, because that will be really useful to have. Anyways, we have a very simple resource. It's not too complicated. As I mentioned, we have our key. We have some, so this is about the different types of the properties that you can have on DSC class. So if you want to define a property, you just use DSC property, and then you specify here in the attribute, you specify what type of property you want. So you can have key, you can have mandatory, you can have not configurable, which is just something that you cannot say, you won't allow users to change, but when they request the instance of your class, they will see what it is. So a good example of that would be, let's say you want to have ability to put the files on disk, right? If you put the files on disk, it's not something that user can specify what the size of the file will be if you copy it from some other location. So obviously size would not be something that you want to allow them to specify, because that makes no sense. But you maybe want to show them because there is a reason for them to see it. So that's one of the examples of the not configurable property that you might want to have. And by default, if you don't specify anything, it's write, so you can just write it, which is, well, what we normally do with our properties that are not key. Folder structure, so as I mentioned, another thing I like about classes is that you can get away with two files. You don't have to have this interesting folder structure that you get in the resources from that are deployed with the PowerShell modules, where you have manifest, underneath it you have DSC resources folder, underneath it you have some modules, and those have PSM1s, and you have to remember how the structure. Obviously, I'm pretty sure that somebody came up with the tool that just generates it for you with some nice tooling, but why bother? If you can just have two files, manifest and your PSM1 file that contains your classes, you're all set, and you don't have to worry about all this additional junk that you don't necessarily need yourself, but PowerShell definitely needs that to be able to distinguish between those different resources that you put in the DSC resources module. So if I look at the manifest, the important thing that you have to remember is that whenever you create your DSC resources, you need to specify, whenever you create DSC resource using PowerShell classes, You have to specify DSC resources to export. That's the field that PowerShell will use to tell what you actually have in your DSC resource module. And we can also look at the code very quickly. I will probably go back to actual module later. So you can see that we have different methods. And what is important here is that we define this type. And we can use it for our purposes. So, by the way, if you are trying to get your DSC resources, the one thing that you will probably notice sooner rather than later is that usually when you want to interact with your DSC resources in the console, let's say you want to see what's happening when you try to use it, is that by default you have to put using module at the top. I mean, it's pretty easy in the console because you are always at the top. But if you want to have like demo code like this one, you have to hack a little bit around it. So let's just make this thing work. So what I wanted to show you here is that I'm gonna create instance of my resource class, which is completely useless. It doesn't do anything productive. And I would try to get, set, and test. So as you can see, if I run it, I get my key, which has key value, not very interesting. And then when I run test, I design it in a way that always returns false, very useful. Resources that never got in the desired state are the best one that you can have. And set doesn't do anything, obviously. By default, it returns no void, so you won't see anything on your screen when you run it. Okay, so this is basically like the 101 when it comes to the structure of PowerShell DSC class-based resources. Now to the ideas. So while working on the resources, we quickly identified that sometimes we have repetitive code that we want to have in one certain place, especially when you have, let's say, 5, 10 resources in a single module. So what we discovered was that, okay, we very often want to write to screen when we want to be able to respond to exceptions that happen in commands in a way that don't break PowerShell. So from our perspective, if you run test or get, nothing should throw because that means that the whole engine will go bonkers. And even if you, let's say you want to run full cycle, it will just stop at this point and won't do anything else. From set, we definitely want to write error because then you just know that you didn't succeed in setting things. So PowerShell subsystem will think, okay, you are in pending configuration, so I have to repeat it until it's all good. And because of that, we wanted to have some kind of utility methods that we can use or abuse inside of our code, and we want to share them across all the DSC resources in the given DSC resources module. So here you can see that another thing is that you very often, like when you create those DSC resources for a given technology, you will need to import certain modules before you can do anything because you're going to use commands from the set modules. So for example, if you try to prepare something that will work with your disks, then you would probably want to import the storage module. And you want to do that in controlled manner, so you can add some error handling around it here. I didn't do that because this is just for demo purposes, but normally you would probably do that. So here I have the one method report issue, and this method is being called multiple times from write error, write verbose, write warning. So that allows me to pick and choose what I want to report to the user. Here you could add something like logging to the event log, for example, if you really want to see that. So you can have some robust solutions, and then in your code for actual class-based resource, you don't have to repeat this code and make it, you don't pollute the code that you really want to show to you don't pollute the code that's important from the logic perspective, so business logic perspective, right? Because there you want to have it as short as to the point as possible without all these additional elements that are not necessary. And also you don't want to repeat this code in each and every class that you define because that doesn't make any sense. If you can derive from inherit from one class that just defines those utilities, you can just take it from there. So that's the idea number one. Let's double check what else I wanted to share. Using get. So what I noticed when I was working with the DSC resources a lot is that people tend to ignore get as like useless. And my gut feeling is that they make a mistake. And the reason for that is because I think that get, first of all, it's nice to be able to get DSC configuration without things slapping you in the face or just giving you wrong data. That's one thing. A second thing is that when you put effort into having a correct get, which will show you in a minute, then your tests and sets can be way simpler than they would be if you would have your get, well, like existing without any other logic in that. So let's look at this here. So here what I'm trying to do is just I'm in my get. Obviously, I need to return the instance of the class that I'm working with. And once I do that, in my test, I can just say, okay, let's see what's the current state of the world look like. And I can just say current, just this get. And then I know that this current represents what I have. This represents what I want to have. So I can just compare the two, and that's my test, right? That's all I need to do. I don't have to do anything more than that, because I know that if I compare those two things and they differ, then, well, something is wrong. Similarly in set, let's say you have a situation where making changes to, like, shoving all the changes in set kind of works, but it's maybe sluggish or just can cost, like, you just reconfigure network and then it's just like few pings lost because you set the network card because of that. All those things, if they are not necessary, you probably don't want to do them. So if you take this approach again, here in set, you can say, okay, I missed the get thing, right? Yeah, okay, I'm scrolling too fast for my own taste, for my own good. Yeah, I think I missed it. So it should actually here, it should be something like, okay, if in the set it should actually say something, okay, I'm getting it. If I see that this is different, then I'm gonna set that. If that is different, I'm gonna set only that. I'm not gonna set everything at once. Another thing, I mentioned inheritance. We already inherited from this base class, but we can do something more advanced sometimes. So let's say you have this resource that you created yourself, and you kind of feel like, okay, this solves like most of the problems that I have. But sometimes you have this corner case when you say, okay, I would like to have, for certain scenarios, I would like to have 1 or 2 additional properties. So instead of rewriting or copy-pasting the whole code, what you can do is, again, take advantage of inheritance, inherit from the class that you already had, and just add those things that you are missing. And then you have to remember that certain things will require you to work harder. But as you can see here, let's say that set behavior is different and the get and test should behave the same. Well, all I have to do is just to make sure that the set will actually run the set. So the example I gave before, right? If you have some smart thing that will put files on your system, that is great. But let's say it's, again, configuration file, then probably in your sets, so whenever you change, so when you test, you don't care about the script block that you would run when change environment, right? It's not important. You're not going to compare it. It's not something that exists on the desk. When you get, you also won't be able to see it because it's not there. It's in your configuration only. Now, if you run set, then it's different. Then you want to create a script block that will change things, and this script block then you will run. And that means that when you change the configuration file, you have a script that will be called every time, and then just every time it changes, it will be called. Not every time. Every time the system changes, it will be called, which helps you like make sure that thing that you change are actually reflected in reality. That kind of breaks the concept of not touching somebody else's things while you're in DSC resource, but I haven't found a way in DSC that will be better. In other configuration management, you usually can have something like triggers that you can say to this resource, oh, you need to restart. We don't have it in PowerShell DSC, so it's kind of hack around this problem that allows you to, for example, if you change configuration file and you want to have the service running all the time, those two things say, well, okay, service running, configuration file there. And then when you say, okay, when you change the configuration file, restart the service, then I'm kind of like, I'm just starting to play in somebody else's sandpit, and they may not like it. So that's what something we should avoid. But in this case, I think that's the only way, only reasonable solution for the problem. Yeah, so here I think I actually was doing that. Yeah, see, I knew that I had it somewhere. So here, this the example I mentioned before. I think I didn't scroll fast enough this time around. And as you can see here, I'm just saying, okay, this is my current situation. If the current first is not this first, which means that the first is incorrect, then I just apply that first value. And if the second is incorrect, then I just change the second. So there are other ideas. So what we notice as well is just that we tend to have issues where you don't want to put everything in your DSC resources, so you want to have like modules that you will install on the box that will allow you to talk to the given technology and then take advantage of those modules. That first of all makes it possible to just test around easier, and second of all, it allows you to work around problems that we definitely face. So, for example, like having external DLLs imported in DSC classes is a nightmare. And all those, there are more problems like this. I will get to them later. Another thing that we definitely see is that helper methods and properties are very useful, so we can put them on your DSC resources. And that means that you can, again, take away some code from set, test, and get, and make sure that this code is pretty consistent, and just say, okay, set resource, blah, blah, blah. It will just do something very easy to understand, and all the logic that is just doing something like going down and dirty is just moved to those helper methods. You can also have a constant in your DSC resources. So you notice that most of the properties that I have are exposed with this DSC property attribute. If you don't put it on the property, it will be still there, but the users, when they try to set the configuration, they won't be able to change it. So we can put things like the registry location when you expect things to change. I will get to that later. We don't have too much time, but I will try to get that later anyway. Another thing is using try-catch family. It allows you to kind of make sure that you don't miss any kind of throw somewhere in the middle. And take advantage of constructors. That's something I've seen on the DSC resource module that is installed on your box, which actually uses classes. And there they use constructor to initialize certain things. I think it's a very smart idea. I haven't got to that yet, but I think I like the idea a lot. Regarding pitfalls, so I mentioned those things with modules. So whenever you have a situation where your DSC class resources is not working well, because, for example, you have different OS version, you have this external DLLs, those things usually can be solved by creating a module that kind of sits in between your DSC resource and actual machine, because that means that this module can be just imported. Obviously, then you have to handle distribution of this module to your boxes, but well, I think you have a good tool for that in DSC, so you should be good. And this external DLLs, we had just a huge struggle with having we needed some technology that required us to import DLL. Doing that in the regular PowerShell module worked fine in DSC classes. It worked fine in the console, but when we tried to do that in the context of DSC itself, it started to fall apart. And we decided, okay, let's just move it to module. Then all you do is you call command, and then everything else is happening outside of the DSC scope. And I mentioned this issue with the outering. So you have to remember that the file the class that you define ends up in some kind of form of MOF. And MOF has certain limitations. The thing I definitely found was that certain types will not work. So if you put the DSC property and you specify some types, it will tell you that it's all fine, but when you try to compile it later, it won't work. And second thing that I noticed is that for example, I think it will allow you to have keys that are the keys that are collections, but in reality, it won't be possible to compile that into MOF. So you have to be careful that even if you see that the DSC resources looks fine and you can even compile it and you can create an instance of this class, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will work properly. Okay, any questions? We are a bit over time, but we still have 10 minutes, so I was hoping to touch on a pass a little bit. Okay, I don't see any questions. I'm not sure if it's a good sign or bad sign. I'm not going to pay attention to that. So when you test your DSC resources, we do something similar to what you probably did with the resources that are written with the PowerShell modules. So the difference being that there you would import module, right? And just like get target resource, set target resource, you would run those commands in this very limited context, and then you would just need to make sure that you actually throw everything away so that, you know, the different resources don't try to do the same thing, different things from the other module. It was a mess a little bit. With the DSC resources based in the classes, you would have to just use construct using a module, which allows you to suck in the class into your current session. And then what you do is just create instance of this class, and then you just run methods and see what happens. There are some limitations, as I mentioned, this thing that we cannot, I have no idea how to properly test the fact that it actually can be compiled in the proper MOF. If you know the way, I'm open to suggestions. But so far, we just wing it. So we try to just assume that we know what we should not do. And then we just at the like pull request phase, we will just point out, okay, this will not work because I know that it fails in the context of DSC. Pester will not help us with that at this point. So here I have my test script. And the way we write our the tests for our resource modules is that we don't want to like discourage people for creating DSC resources, but we want to discourage them from doing that without proper tests. So let me start PowerShell very quick, because I usually, that's another thing. When you test with your DSC resources based in classes with using Pester or any other tool, I think, the best approach is just to always start fresh session, because you will always risk that the definition of your class from the previous runs is still there. So if you change the class, then you would re-import it. If you just rerun the tests, that's fine, if you're like fixing the tests rather than fixing the code. But if you are changing the code, please remember you have to restart the session in order to avoid any issues that might appear. Ooh, that's not what I wanted. Okay, let's go like this. No. Okay. And now invoke Pester. No? Okay, that's nice. So my script is 8, and I want output to be detailed. Yes. Go. So you can see that it gave me a lot of red. Let me just make sure that you can see what it says. So as you can see here, it just complained that resource path elements that I added just before the session, because why would you not change your demos just like 2 hours before the session starts? The resource I added to this module doesn't have tests. I mean, it does have, but I commented them out to show you what it would do if I wouldn't have any tests. So that gives me already the incentive. Okay, you need to write tests for your resource. So here I'm adding this resource. No, that's not what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do. And as you can see, this is just a big switch where we say, okay, give me all the resources in this module, and then for any exported DSC resources, I'm just going through them one by one and making sure that they have tests, and I run tests for this given resource. So as I mentioned, you have to keep in mind, first of all, when you write your tests, the using module is a requirement for sure. You have to have it in your test script, otherwise you won't be able to do anything with your classes. Then this one is actually already supported for version 5, so I rewritten that one for version 5 of Pester. You will have slightly different syntax probably in version 4. So depending on which Pester version you use, you might need to tweak it a little bit. And the thing that I always do is before each, I create instance of my class. And the reason why I do that in before each is that sometimes I found myself in a situation where I initialize that, change something, and then my tests start to depend on those changes, and they kind of chain them like this. But that doesn't really fit well with unit testing, right? You should be able to say, okay, this is the test, just go, and it works. So that would not work if you would have before all, but if you do before each, then you always initialize, you always get a fresh copy of this object. And as you can see, we just group them in the three contexts usually. So we have one for get, where we test if the get behaves properly. We have one for test, and we have one for set. So now that I fixed the file, so I have test for everything, let's take a look at the results. So yeah, it's all good. Obviously, one thing that I strongly recommend anybody testing their code, just go back, change something, make sure that if you expect it to fail, it actually fails, because with that, you will be able to prevent yourself from being sure that you got everything right, whereas you just didn't see that there was an issue with your tests. One thing that is also nice about, I mentioned in the before about this helper methods. The thing is that if you structure your code like this, then mocking becomes possible. I had a session about mocking on Monday, and I did mention that mocking the classes is not that easy, but DSC resources is different, right? Because this is a class you just created, you have full ownership of it. But what you sometimes want to do is say, okay, I don't want to mock set, test, and get. That doesn't make any sense, because if you replace them with what you expect to see, you are testing your mocks, basically, right? So that's not the good way to approach that problem. So what you can do instead is, if you have those helper methods, you just mock those guys, and when you do that, you kind of change how those down and dirty elements change, and you are all set. So I'm going to show you here. I have the resource. So I mentioned one reason you cannot find resources. Another reason that you can be encouraged or tempted or even forced to create your own resources that I forgot to mention is that when you see resources that exist, but they do terrible job at what they do. And one of those things is when you try to configure path environment variable with environment DSC resource. First of all, if you have it multiple times in your code, good luck, because then you just try to use the same resource with the same key, which is environment variable name, and different values. DSC will not like you for that, for sure. Second thing is that what we discovered the hard way is that this, even if you can somehow manage to maybe you AST it and just combine all those paths in one thing and then it works, the one thing that we noticed is that this resource decided we don't care about the expandable, not expandable elements in your registry. So we're going to expand all those paths that you have, and we're going to shove them back in. Which means that instead of having clean path variable, you will have C, Windows, system32, blah, 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 instead of just percent, whatever. We'll see that probably in a minute. So what we decided to do, we just said, okay, first of all, we want to be able to add only an element to the path. So we don't want to specify the whole path environment variable. We just want to add one tiny bit to it. So we want to be able to do that. And also, we don't want to mess up with the registry in a way that the built-in resource is doing it. So here I have my path element class. So let me just maybe do the using. No, it won't work like this. Using caps lock. My resource PSD1 using module, obviously. And now I can create an instance of this class. So let's say foo equals path element new. So now I have a helper method because I like to do the things like this. Get path elements, and it just gives me the list of path elements. As you can see, that's what I meant. Those guys with the built-in resource, they will just get exploded, and you will never see the system root ever again, which is not great. But here we will definitely be able to modify the path without messing it up. That's another reason why we would create DSC resources as well. And here we have this resource that basically just allows me to put things in the registry. To do that, I'm using some built-in property. So I mentioned before, you can have static properties that nobody will be seeing outside of the you running in the console, so DSC users will never see this property. And then what I'm doing here is that I know that I'm going to use method open subkey. So instead of returning the object that the PowerShell expects or PowerShell normally gets from this method call, I'm just faking it. And well, I'm using classes for that because why not? And this fake key class is actually having another set of methods that I have to use. So as you can see, there's just a whole chain of things that have to happen in order for that to work. But I'm mocking with this fake class, I'm mocking behavior of the get value and set value. And I'm just saying, okay, if you get value, you just tell me, okay, what parameters you had, and you return something because I need to get some information about what paths actually was before I actually started touching it. And the next thing I do is just for set value, I just say, okay, just dump the parameters that were provided to you, and I won't be able to read them later. So in my code for testing, on the other hand, I can just, first of all, forget, I know what the get will return, because I just faked the behavior of the class, right? So I just told it, okay, this is what you should do. So instead of returning this, that the real thing is returning, it will return foobar and cwindows temp, which is obviously not my path, but I don't care, because in this context, I really want to make sure that I'm not changing the environment variables. I just want to be able to tell if I would have the environment variable of that value, it is possible to change it. So that's that, and then we just go through the code and run the test, and we just verify with get content. We just we can check if things will change the way we expect them to. I also have a test here that makes sure that when I get values, I'm not getting them like in a dumb way that the PowerShell is doing it, but I'm getting this value. Where is this test? Yeah, so that's the important part, that I do run the get value with this do not expand environment names, which was this % system drive. And yeah, that's basically it. Any questions? I mean, we are way over time. Sorry guys for that. Yeah?
Is this what's mentioned in the session with the DSC version 3, that you should write your resources as class-based?
So the question is it mentioned in, sorry, could you repeat it?
They mentioned the DSC version 3, the upcoming
yeah.
version, that all the resources should be...
Okay, yeah. So the question is about DSC version 3, and I believe in this one, indeed, you don't have a choice. And the reason for that is that they want to open it up for XPlat and those things. And in this scenarios, the construction that we had for PowerShell DSC resources before doesn't work anymore, because the MOF will probably not be involved anymore, and all those things will be different from that perspective as well. Any other questions? If not, then thank you. Thank you. Staying until well, I don't know how, it doesn't show the minus values, but I'm pretty sure it's like -5 by now. So thank you for attending, and enjoy the rest of your conference.